Tyberos the Red Wake is a biological anomaly. He is larger, denser, and more brutal than a standard space marine has any right to be. When Belisarius Cawl offered the Primaris upgrades to the Imperium, chapters bled and died to cross the Rubicon. Tyberos stayed in the outer dark. The Inquisition says it's because the Carcharodons are stubborn. The Mechanicus says it's because they are isolated. But both are wrong. The Rubicon Primaris does not just upgrade your armor, it sequences your genome. And if Tyberos the Red Wake is actually the lost Null Primarch, crossing the Rubicon would expose his true lineage to the entire galaxy. Start with the database entry because that is where the problem lives. The Lexicanum, the largest, most carefully maintained Warhammer 40K reference wiki, drawing directly on Codex, Black Library, and Forge World sources, maintains a data field on every named Space Marine character labeled Relatives, Father via Gene Seed. Every named character: Marneus Calgar, Roboute Guilliman, Astorath the Grim, Sanguinius. Every chapter master in the database answers that field with a Primarch's name, because every Space Marine in the Imperium is genetically descended from one of the 20 sons of the Emperor. The field exists precisely because the lineage is always resolvable. It's always resolvable. The entry for Tyberos the Red Wake fills that field with two words: unknown Primarch. Not unconfirmed, not disputed, not under investigation, unknown. He is the only named character in the entire English Lexicanum database for whom that field remains definitively unresolved rather than named. You can look at every chapter master entry on that site and trace every genetic lineage back to a Legion founder, except his. His terminates at an unknown, and no subsequent update, no expanded sourcebook, no Black Library clarification has changed it. The database has been maintained for years. The field stays empty. That anomaly does not begin with the Rubicon. It begins with the body. Picture the hangar deck of a battle barge in the void between stars. The lighting aboard Nicor isn't the sterile white of a standard Imperial vessel. It's something colder, the kind of illumination that makes bones look like they were carved rather than grown. The Red Brethren stand assembled in their Terminator plate, warriors who have each individually been rebuilt from the inside out twice over, armor systems drawing power from generators capable of moving a tank. They are, by any standard measure, enormous, and Tyberos the Red Wake stands a head above them. Robbie McNiven's 2018 novel, Carcharodons, Outer Dark, contains the primary canonical physical description. A head taller than his own Terminator honor guard, not taller than standard Astartes in flak armor, taller than warriors already encased in tactical dreadnought plate, already operating at the extreme edge of what a human-derived biology can become through 19 implanted organs, decades of gene conditioning, and the particular metabolic machinery of a Space Marine in full combat readiness. His suit is described as heavily modified to suit his stature. The customization flows in the direction that matters. The armor was shaped to the body, not the body compressed to fit the armor. McNiven places him as an utterly immovable presence, a supreme predator whose massive custom suit requires vast power to keep its thick servo bundles active. Secondary editorial coverage describes Tyberos as having extreme size and unusual agility in melee despite his bulk, the kind of physical profile that strains the vocabulary normally used for Space Marines. That isn't enthusiasm. That is a writer reaching for the only available vocabulary register and finding that only Primarch language fits what is being described. Language has limits. When those limits are exceeded, the vocabulary of adjacent categories migrates in. Remove the helmet and the face is something else entirely. Imperial Armor, Volume 10, The Badab War, Part 2, describes what is underneath as a corpse-white nightmare, with half the bones of the face exposed in a bloodless grimace, his eyes a soulless, depthless black. No iris, no white, just black, all the way across. The same trait visible in portraits of Raven Guard successors and Night Lord's gene descendants, compressed here into something that reads less like a biological marker and more like something looking out through a mask worn slightly wrong. His voice does not match the face. It's soft, a whisper that carries across vaulted spaces without effort, carrying, as the Lexicanum records it, the promise of certain death. The physical contradiction, maximum destruction operating through minimum vocal effort, is consistent enough across multiple accounts that it reads as deliberate. He does not raise his voice because he does not need to. Whatever he is, the room has already received the signal. Witnesses who survived combat with him produced accounts that Imperial armor documents with archival precision. A blood-splattered killing machine moving almost too fast for the eye to see. The critical qualifier is what follows. He isn't acting in rage. The Lexicanum entry is careful about this. Precise and deadly intention in combat, as if every strike was cold and calculated beforehand, rather than the product of mere rage. A standard Berserker-class combatant generates devastation through volume of violence. Tyberos generates it through precision operating at a speed the eye can't track. The first mode is a biological state. The second is applied intelligence running faster than observation can record. His weapons are called Hunger and Slake, two ancient gauntlet-type devices, each combining a power fist's crushing hydraulic force, retractable claw blades, and internal chainsword mechanisms into a single articulated unit. He claimed them after defeating a renegade Terminator champion during the Badab War, took them off a dead man's hands and never put them down. The Lexicanum records them as of a pattern and manufacture unknown to the adepts of Mars. An institution that has cataloged weapon systems across 10,000 years of industrial warfare across 100,000 worlds, that has magi who can identify a bolter's forge of origin from the tool markings on a recovered casing. They can't identify who built the Shade Lord's gauntlets. They can't place them in any production lineage, any Forge World record, any known design tradition. The tech priests who know everything about how weapons are made don't know when these were made or by whom. They predate whatever record-keeping the Mechanicus trusts. He is chapter master of the Carcharodons Astra and simultaneously commands the first company, the Red Brethren, Terminator-clad specialists operating at the sharpest edge of the chapter's capacity. Most chapter masters don't personally lead their first company into every engagement. The administrative and strategic function of the office typically creates some separation from frontline unit command. Tyberos holds both, always armored, always present, always, by structural default, in a context where the surrounding violence makes leisurely physical examination impossible. No inquisitorial envoy examines a chapter master mid-assault. No Magos biologist requests a tissue sample during a boarding action. The conditions Tyberos operates in are exactly the conditions under which no one is looking closely at anything except survival. Now bring the Primaris Marines into the picture. In the era Indomitus, following Guilliman's return, Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Cawl unveiled what he had been building for 10,000 standard years. The Warhammer 40k wiki's canonical description of the project is exact. Cawl perfected the Emperor's original genetic template for the Space Marines, using genomes from the original Primarchs to enhance the Emperor's original work. 10 millennia of development. The biological upgrade the Emperor had originally designed, finally delivered at the moment the Imperium needed it most. Chapters lined up to cross. Marneus Calgar of the Ultramarines was the first named chapter master to undergo conversion. His surgery was experimental. Cawl reportedly predicted a 61.6% failure rate before the procedure began, a figure that indicates more than half of the earliest candidates weren't expected to survive. They crossed anyway. Chief Librarian Mephiston of the Blood Angels crossed and emerged a Primaris librarian. Veterans across dozens of chapters accepted the mortality arithmetic and went under the knife because what Cawl was offering, the Emperor's completed design, was worth the cost. Later refinements brought that mortality rate below 10%. The mathematics improved. The willingness was never the issue. Space Marines aren't men who avoid a procedure because it might kill them. The Carcharodons didn't cross. No document records a formal refusal. No inquisitorial file notes a declination. The Black Templars' theological hesitation is canonical, with portions of their crusades recording the procedure as approaching heresy, and that position filed formally with doctrinal justification. That document exists. The reasoning is on record. The Carcharodons have nothing equivalent. No principle stated, no edict issued, no formal engagement with the question at any level. Their absence from every Primaris record covering the era Indomitus is total and unaddressed. In an era defined by the transformation of the Astartes, they haven't transformed. No one can point to the moment they were asked and declined. The question may never have been formally posed. And Tyberos has been meticulous about ensuring it wasn't. That absence is the data point that matters. To understand why it matters, you need to understand exactly what the Rubicon Primaris does to a body. The procedure begins before the first incision. A firstborn Astartes undergoing the Rubicon carries 19 implanted organs from his original creation, a system that has been integrating with his specific biology for decades, calibrating to his individual chemistry, producing the progenoid glands that feed the chapter's geneseed supply. That system has to be partially undone before the new configuration can be built on top of it. The Marine is opened, not in the field surgery sense, opened in the clinical sense, with the systematic exposure of internal structures that have fused to each other across a lifetime of combat service. 3 new organs must be placed. The sinew coils are threaded onto tendons throughout the entire body. Not a single incision, but dozens, working through the limbs, the shoulders, the neck, the core. Every major tendon attachment point is accessed and modified. The scale of this alone exceeds what most surgical traditions consider a procedure. It's a restructuring. The Magnificat, a small gland approximately the size of a thumb, is implanted to amplify the growth-stimulating hormonal signals the Astartes biology already carries, preparing the system for what follows. The Belisarian furnace goes into the chest cavity, where it must be positioned to bond directly with the Marine's existing hearts. That bonding isn't gradual. According to the lore surrounding Mephiston's conversion, once implanted, the furnace would rapidly bond with his hearts and immediately begin to excrete specialized hormones into his body. Whatever the Marine's circulatory system was carrying a moment before the furnace activates, whatever chemical signature existed in the blood, whatever biological baseline the body maintained before intervention, changes immediately. The furnace is releasing compounds into the bloodstream before the incision that placed it has been closed. The Lexicanum's description of what happens next is the line that sits in the mind and does not leave. When the organs are successfully implanted, the now deceased Space Marine's body is left rent and open to the air as his wounds are stitched closed. The body dies. Between the furnace's activation and the stabilization of the new hormonal cascade, the Marine's vital signs drop to nothing. The furnace is what restarts him. The procedure is designed to pass through death and come back. Whatever diagnostic instruments are monitoring the patient at that moment, whatever readings are being taken as the body crosses through its lowest point and begins the return, are operating at the precise instant the subject's biology is most chemically naked. Bone-softening compounds are circulating. Growth signals are firing. The furnace compounds are flooding the circulatory system. The Primarch-derived templates, which are the biological architecture underlying every Primaris organ ever implanted, are interfacing with the patient's native tissue for the first time. Interface requires recognition. Recognition requires reading. The black carapace is removed in this process and replaced or heavily modified to integrate the new armor systems. Bones are chemically softened and then allowed to reform in the new configuration. The body grows approximately 1 Terran foot taller as the process completes, a structural expansion across the entire skeletal frame, not a localized change. Community descriptions of the bone phase use stark language. The process involves implanting the organ that loosens the skeleton, allowing the body to grow, sealing the exterior while the expansion occurs. A Marine who walks into the Rubicon procedure walks out in a body that is physically larger, not metaphorically larger, measurably, structurally, irrevocably larger. The procedure transforms the physical dimensions of the being undergoing it. None of this is performed by Cawl personally for each individual Marine. The procedure is distributed. Chapter apothecaries and Mechanicus biologist personnel administer it across the galaxy, without Cawl at every operating table. But the biology being introduced is Cawl's. It was designed against Primarch templates. It carries the signature of 10,000 years of the most sophisticated genomic work in Imperial history. And at the center of every successful Rubicon procedure, the Primarch-derived organs are integrating with whatever biology they encounter. They are learning the body they inhabit. The body is being reshaped to receive them. The man who designed those organs has spent 10,000 years building his understanding of Primarch biology. Whatever his machinery reads, he built it to read precisely. This is where Belisarius Cawl becomes the specific threat that makes the entire argument function. He holds the Magna Mater, an artifact constructed by the Selenar geneticists of Luna, containing genetic information from all 20 Primarchs. Confirmed canon. The Warhammer 40K wiki canonical description of Cawl's work is explicit. He perfected the Emperor's original genetic template for the Space Marines, using genomes from the original Primarchs to enhance the Emperor's original work. He didn't approximate those genomes. He didn't reconstruct them from derivative materials. He had the source document. He worked from primary material across 10,000 standard years, with resources and knowledge that multiple Black Library sources describe as partially granted by the Emperor himself. The scope of that project is worth sitting with. 10,000 years is longer than most imperial institutions have existed in their current form. The Adeptus Mechanicus, as it operates today, isn't the same organization it was at the founding. The Inquisition's internal structure has reorganized repeatedly.
The chapter system itself was established after the heresy and has been evolving since. Cawl began this project before many of those institutions existed in their current configurations, and continued it through all of their subsequent changes. The Primaris development ran parallel to every war, every catastrophe, every political upheaval in Imperial history from M31 to M42. He kept building. The accumulation of genetic knowledge across that span isn't comparable to anything else in the setting. His active capabilities go considerably further than archive holding. According to multiple analyses of his Black Library novel, Belisarius Cawl, The Great Work by Guy Haley, Cawl dissected the immortus gland, a Primarch-specific biological structure specifically associated with Guilliman's physiology, to create Alpha Primus, the proto-Primaris soldier who served as the proof of concept for the entire project. This isn't template consulting. This is the active dismantling of a Primarch-grade biological component at the sub-organ level to extract its functional architecture and rebuild something new from the principles discovered. A man capable of that operation isn't a man who reads genetic information passively. He is a man who takes it apart until he understands why each piece works the way it does, and then builds something with the knowledge. Community readings of the novel Dark Imperium by Guy Haley describe Cawl testing not only loyalist genocide but traitor genocide and material connected to the lost Primarchs. Guilliman's response was explicit prohibition. He forbade Cawl from using traitor genocide in Primaris creation. Cawl didn't stop collecting the data. He was told he couldn't use it. He continued to study it. An archmagos who accumulates forbidden genomic data without authorization across a period of 10,000 years, operating on the grounds that the Emperor's personal commission gave him latitude that Guilliman's subsequent oversight couldn't fully constrain. That isn't a scientist who limits himself to the approved catalog. He is a scientist who collects everything available, organizes it by relevance, and decides later what he is permitted to deploy. Every chapter whose genocide descends from any of the 18 known loyalist Primarchs presents Cawl's apparatus with a recognizable signature. The templates are there. The comparisons are available. For a chapter master who crosses the Rubicon, the process generates a reading that maps against a known template and resolves cleanly. The lineage is confirmed. The procedure continues. The Mechanicus records another successful conversion. For a chapter master whose biology traces back to something in the Magna Mater's degraded sectors, filed under the two Primarchs that were deliberately expunged from Imperial records before Istvan V, the process generates something the apparatus has never cleanly resolved before. Not a corruption flag, not a simple failure, something structurally coherent but architecturally wrong for every known category. A reading that begins the comparison pass and arrives at a signature that does not match any of the 18 clean templates, does not read as chaos contamination, but does resemble, partially, brokenly, with the specific structural weight of Primarch-grade genetic material, something in the portion of the archive that no one is supposed to be examining. This is inference. That characterization must be stated clearly and maintained. The Rubicon Primaris's exact diagnostic architecture isn't described in any codex or Black Library novel currently in the record. What the lore describes is surgery, organ implantation, bone modification, and tissue integration. The specific claim that Cawl's apparatus runs a comparison against Primarch templates during the procedure isn't confirmed canon. It's a logical deduction derived from confirmed capabilities and confirmed biological mechanics. And the gap between those confirmed facts and the conclusion requires only that Cawl built his masterwork with the same rigor he applied to every other component of 10,000 years of work. Nothing in his documented profile suggests otherwise. Now, address the objection that always arrives here first, because it deserves full engagement before the argument advances. His genocide has been tested. The results came back clean. This counter-argument is structurally correct. It must be taken seriously. The Adeptus Mechanicus requires each chapter to tithe 5% of its genocide to Mars. Every source describing the tithe process is consistent: quality control, corruption check, mutation screen, chaos contamination detection, and maintenance of genetic stocks for future chapter foundings. The tithe apparatus has been running for 10,000 years. If Tyberos' chapter submitted to it and passed, that is a real data point. A purity check that passed is a purity check that passed. What it isn't is a genealogical audit. The proof of that distinction lives in the existence of chapters with officially unresolved Primarch lineage. If standard genocide testing reliably identified ancestry, those chapters wouldn't exist. The Mechanicus has been testing genocide continuously for 10,000 years. Multiple chapters in the current era still carry an unknown or officially contested progenitor in imperial records, despite decades of tithe compliance. The same apparatus that can detect chaos mutation across 20 generations of genocide drift can't consistently determine whether a given genocide traces back to Corax rather than someone else. These are different questions answered by different analytical instruments. A purity check asks whether the sample is corrupted. A lineage audit asks where the sample ultimately came from. The Mechanicus tithe was designed for the first question. It wasn't designed for the second. The Carcharodons themselves are the available demonstration. Forge World's original rules list their progenitor as unknown. The fandom wiki classifies them as an alleged successor chapter of the Raven Guard, though this remains unconfirmed. A Bolter and Chainsword community analysis describes their genocide as a chimeric mix of Raven Guard, Night Lords, and possibly World Eaters. Deathwatch RPG material reportedly confirms Raven Guard lineage. Community discussion connects their fully black eyes and extreme pallor, corpse-white skin, void dark irises, to Raven Guard genocide expression. Multiple accounts, each pointing at a different resolution, none of them definitive. Decades of scrutiny from multiple directions producing a contested answer rather than a resolved one. If the tithe apparatus identified ancestry with any reliability, the Carcharodons question would have been settled at the first examination. It hasn't been settled. It remains open. The apparatus hasn't closed it. A clean tithe tells you the genocide isn't corrupted. It says nothing about what the genocide is descended from. But the deeper problem runs beneath that argument, at a level that makes the lineage identification question almost secondary. Primarchs aren't produced by the genocide cycle. They are its origin point. The canonical description is precise. The Primarchs' genomes served as the genetic templates from which the Emperor crafted his 20 Space Marine legions. Templates first. Derivative copies after, introduced into recruits through a 19-stage implantation process that ultimately produces the progenoid glands, the very biological structures the tithe apparatus examines. A Primarch does not have genocide in the conventional sense. A Primarch has the master document from which all genocide was eventually copied and recopied across 10,000 years of chapter foundings.
Primarch DNA and Astartes genocide share information the way a primary text shares information with a translation that has been retranslated 17 times. The relationship is real. The documents aren't the same. Structural information present in the original may not survive the cascade of successive derivations. Structural information not present in any derivation may be present only in the original. The Tithe examines the progenoid glands. It's testing derivative material, multiple generations removed from whatever source it ultimately came from. If a being's true biology operates at the source level rather than the derivative level, if the progenoid glands present for examination are structurally Astartes compatible, but the underlying genomic architecture belongs to a different category entirely, the Tithe examines what is being offered, not what is being withheld. The instrument is pointed at the copy. The original isn't in the room. A metal detector does not find what is embedded in the concrete below its sweep. The Rubicon Primaris is a different instrument, designed by the man who holds the originals. Distance, then, becomes the only reliable defense. The outer dark provides it. The Carcharodons Astra operate at the extreme galactic fringe, void space beyond stable supply routes, beyond predictable warp transit corridors, in the dark between the stars that the Astronomicon barely reaches. The wiki describes them as arriving in the latter stages of the Badab War, a conflict that had been running for years before the space sharks appeared. They weren't summoned. They weren't deployed through standard Imperial channels. They arrived when they arrived, and when they did, the Lexicanum records the result. Bloody assault after bloody assault, their savagery unmatched in the Badab War. The Red Brethren hitting entrenched positions. Tyberos personally leading Terminator charges that reduced fortified lines to the kind of ruin the word mangled does not fully describe. Then they withdrew, back into the dark, back to the void between systems where the Imperium's administrative infrastructure can't follow. That rhythm, appear without warning, cause maximum destruction, depart before sustained contact becomes possible, isn't merely a tactical preference. It's an institutional pattern that makes persistent scrutiny structurally impossible. No inquisitorial team maintains an embedded liaison with a chapter that might be absent from Imperial space for years at a stretch. No Magos biologist establishes an ongoing biological monitoring relationship with a command structure that can't be reached through standard Vox, can't be located through predictable warp transit, and has no fixed homeworld to anchor administrative contact. The Genocide Tithe requires that 5% of the chapter's supply be submitted to Mars. Compliance for a chapter operating beyond regular Imperial contact on no predictable schedule is, at minimum, ambiguous. No canonical source confirms or denies how consistently the Carcharodons have actually submitted to the Tithe across the millennia. The mechanism that would catch a Primarch in the derivative copy examination is being administered by people who can't reliably find the chapter to conduct the examination. The reputation does additional institutional work. The image of Tyberos, speaking in whispers, moving through combat almost too fast to observe, wearing trophy skulls at his waist, face a corpse-white grimace with black voids where human eyes should be, isn't simply terror. It's a maintained environment. Every Imperial agent who might otherwise request closer examination of the Shade Lord of the Carcharodons arrives at a cultural conclusion before forming the question. The cost of asking awkward things about this particular chapter master is calculated in what remains of the person who asked. The Inquisition investigates what it can reach and survive reaching. The Mechanicus audits what grants it access. Tyberos has spent considerable time being someone that neither institution has practical means of safely approaching. Robbie McNiven,
the Black Library author behind the Carcharodons novels, acknowledged in a documented Q&A that the chapter's connections to heresy-era technology and tactical traditions were real, while deliberately leaving the specifics unresolved. That is an authored ambiguity. The mystery isn't a gap in the research. It's an intentional feature of how the Carcharodons exist in the canon. Someone at Games Workshop decided that the Space Sharks would be the chapter about which the Imperium isn't permitted to know too much. Deliberate, unanswered questions at that level don't happen by accident. The Black Templars' partial Rubicon reluctance is in their codex. Stated reason, on record. Doctrinal justification attached to the silence. The Carcharodons' absence from every Primaris document in the era Indomitus carries no stated reason, no referenced principle, no formal acknowledgement that the Rubicon question was ever formally posed to the Shade Lord. That absence across an entire era, while chapter after chapter either crossed or documented why they had not, isn't a neutral administrative gap. Every cycle that passed without a crossing was a decision maintained. Tyberos maintained it. The chapter maintained it around him. The Outer Dark maintained it around the chapter. 3 layers of institutional distance between the Shade Lord's biology and the one man in the galaxy whose machinery might read it accurately. The chapter is the quarantine. The Outer Dark is the perimeter. The brutality is the no man's land that keeps anyone from getting close enough to ask what they are protecting. He isn't just the Shade Lord. He is the thing the shadow exists to conceal. Now place the 2 erased Primarchs into the frame, because without that foundation, none of the rest coheres. The lost Primarchs, Primarchs 2 and 11, are confirmed canon. The Lexicanum maintains stub articles for both, enough text to establish their creation by the Emperor, their dispersal via warp vortex in infancy, and their subsequent removal from every Imperial record. The language applied to their disappearance is precise and deliberately chosen. They were erased from Imperial records, not lost, not killed in an engagement, not taken by the warp. Active institutional obliteration, conducted with the cooperation of an emperor willing to remove his own sons from the historical record, with surviving Primarchs apparently maintaining the fiction that only 18 brothers had marched in the Great Crusade. By the time of Istvan V, at least 43 years after the erasure, contemporary sources already reference only 18 legions. The operational security had been running that long without a visible breach. The machinery of the cover-up was built well. Games Workshop has confirmed consistently that the lost Primarchs are intentional mysteries, left unresolved by design, with no canonical identity assigned to either. The community has attached Tyberos to the theory repeatedly. Multiple YouTube videos, Reddit threads, Facebook analyses constructing versions of the Null Primarch argument in various levels of detail. The community counter-argument is direct. Tyberos displays none of the characteristics of a Primarch beyond being taller than average for his gene type. That counterposition is worth holding exactly as stated. Physical scale alone proves nothing. A Primarch suppressing their biology to pass as a Space Marine would be, by operational necessity, not displaying the characteristics of a Primarch. The suppression would be the evidence of the suppression. The fact that Tyberos does not glow with visible supernatural authority is exactly what a successfully disguised Primarch would look like. The canonical difficulty here is real and shouldn't be understated.
Primarchs in their natural state carry a psychic presence and physical luminosity that instinctively affects those around them. Beings whose sheer existence alters the atmosphere of a room, who command attention and instinctive deference at a level that Space Marines don't. Sustained suppression of that presence, maintained across millennia, with no confirmed lore mechanism for Primarch biology being modulated downward, is a genuine gap in the masquerade hypothesis. Tyberos' canonical height, a head taller than Terminator's according to one novel, places him as exceptional but not impossible for a large Astartes. His behavioral and physical traits are individually explicable by existing Space Marine variation. None of them, in isolation, requires the Primarch explanation. The Lexicanum does not explain the unknown Primarch field. It records it and offers nothing further. That field isn't empty because a researcher failed to check the source. It's empty because the source material does not provide an answer. Source material does not fail to provide an answer for a named chapter master unless the answer was designed to remain unavailable. Now bring Cawl's archive back into the calculation. The Magna Mater contains genetic information from all 20 Primarchs. The critical caveat: the data for Primarchs 2 and 11 specifically is degraded, incomplete, or otherwise problematic, not absent, not erased, degraded. Whatever the Selenar geneticists of Luna recorded about the two erased suns before the erasure still exists in the Magna Mater's damaged data structure. Cawl holds fragments of a template that the Imperium officially decided 10,000 years ago shouldn't exist. He can't build cleanly from it. He can see its outline. A complete, pristine template comparison would produce a definitive match or a definitive non-match. A degraded, partial template comparison produces something more operationally dangerous, an anomaly. A reading that does not cleanly match any of the 18 Loyalist Primarch signatures. A reading that contains structural information resembling something in the archive's damaged sectors, coherent enough that the diagnostic system can't dismiss it as random mutation, too architecturally specific to classify as standard genetic drift, but without a clean corresponding entry in the approved template library. For any chapter master descended from the 18 known Loyalist lines, the Rubicon generates a result Cawl's apparatus has seen before. The template comparison resolves. The organs integrate. The Marine crosses, rises from the table an inch taller, and the Mechanicus records another conversion. For a being whose biology ultimately traces back to a template filed under degraded, incomplete, or otherwise problematic in the Magna Mater's most sensitive archive, the result is something else entirely. The comparison pass begins. The 18 clean templates are checked against the reading, one by one. None of them match. The system continues into the degraded sectors. The corrupted fragments generate a partial resonance, not a clean match, not a rejection, but a pattern that sits in the space between identified and unidentified, pointing toward a classification that shouldn't exist because the Emperor's own institutional machinery declared it erased. The flag generates before anyone in the room can stop the process. Whatever alarm structure Cawl built for anomalous biological readings, and a man who spent 10,000 years on a classified genomic project designed systems for exactly this category of finding, activates. Not a surgical failure, a discovery. The kind of discovery that does not stay in the operating theater. The kind that goes up the chain of command faster than the Rubicon subject can be resuscitated. This is inference built from confirmed capabilities. The Rubicon Primaris' exact diagnostic process isn't described in any codex or novel.
What is described is Cawl's 10,000-year project.
His possession of all 20 Primarch templates in intact or degraded form, his demonstrated willingness to test biological material he was never authorized to examine, his active dissection of Primarch-grade organs to create Alpha Primus, and a procedure that must biologically integrate Primarch-derived organs with whatever existing biology they encounter. The gap between those confirmed facts and the conclusion that such a system would generate anomalous readings for an anomalous subject requires only that Cawl built his masterwork with the same scientific rigor he applied to everything else. Nothing in his documented profile suggests he built the central diagnostic infrastructure of his life's work to be deliberately blind. Tyberos has never crossed the Rubicon, has never been badly wounded enough to make the crossing seem inevitable. Narrative material describes him as recently having been significantly injured, with community discussion speculating whether that circumstance might eventually force the question. No canonical crossing has occurred. The injury was survived. The gap was maintained. The silence held. He has fought through the Badab War, through conflicts before and after it, through whatever engagements fill 10,000 years of operations in the outer dark. He speaks in whispers and leaves shredded corpses wherever he walks. He claims weapons off dead renegade champions and carries them as relics. He commands a chapter that appears at the edge of Imperial space when the killing needs to be done, and vanishes afterward. In a galaxy where Primaris upgrades are spreading through the Astartes and chapter after chapter is crossing the Rubicon or recording why they didn't, Tyberos has done neither. The absence of both a crossing and a stated refusal is the most precise instrument in this analysis. It isn't the silence of a chapter that never received the question. It's the silence of a being who understood exactly what answering the question would cost, and spent an entire era ensuring the question was never formally posed in a context that required a formal response. The outer dark is geography. The brutality is cultural distance. The Rubicon's continued absence is the maintenance of a quarantine that has been running since before most of the Imperium's current institutions existed. The Genocide Tithe checks for corruption. The purity screen passes. The lineage question remains unresolved. The Rubicon comparison never runs. The anomaly flag is never generated. The Magna Mater's degraded data for the erased Primarchs sits in Cawl's archive, partial and incomplete, never triggered into a match because the one biological signature that might have activated it has never been placed in front of the instrument. Each piece of this architecture is individually explicable as operational habit, chapter culture, geographic isolation. The Carcharodons are brutal and distant and uninterested in imperial oversight. These are confirmed chapter traits, documented across every source that covers them. Nothing about their isolation is impossible to explain without the Null Primarch thesis. Together, the architecture does something different. Each layer of protection, the outer dark, the brutality, the episodic appearance and disappearance, the Tithe compliance ambiguity, the continued non-crossing during the precise era when the Rubicon is most available and most relevant, reinforces the others. Remove any single layer and the protection weakens. Maintain all of them simultaneously, sustained across a timeline measured in millennia, and you haven't a coincidence of chapter habits. You have a system. Systems are designed. The two erased Primarchs were expunged from every record the Imperium controlled. Their legions were dissolved. The historical machinery that might have reconstructed their identities was dismantled or redirected.
The Emperor's own authority was the instrument of the erasure. That is, comprehensive institutional control over what the documentary record shows. What comprehensive institutional control over records can't manage is the body. Documents can be destroyed. Physical existence is structurally more difficult to eliminate. If Primarch II or Primarch XI survived the M31 purge in any form, if the erasure was documentary rather than biological, the problem was never the files. The problem was the being remaining in the galaxy, carrying biology that the Imperium had officially decided shouldn't exist, needing somewhere to be that didn't generate the kind of sustained biological examination that would eventually resolve the unknown Primarch field in the Lexicanum with something more specific than a blank. The outer dark is a long way from Mars. The Genocide Tithe is difficult to enforce consistently on a chapter whose schedule can't be predicted and whose location can't be tracked between engagements. The Rubicon Primaris apparatus, Cawl's full diagnostic infrastructure, is in Forge World facilities, in Mechanicus installations, in the operational centers of Imperial space where the Carcharodons don't linger. All the places where the question is built into the equipment, waiting for the right subject to sit in front of it. The Shade Lord of the Carcharodons Astra does not sit in front of it, hasn't sat in front of it, has, across the entire era during which the Rubicon has spread through the Imperium, maintained a continuous, unbroken, completely undocumented decision to remain exactly as he is. Not upgraded, not crossed, not processed through 10,000 years of Cawl's genetic work. In the outer dark, in the void between systems, in the cold of the galaxy's far edge where the Astronomicon is barely a whisper and the Imperium's administrative reach becomes theoretical, the Shade Lord waits. The Red Brethren stand in their Terminator plate. The Nicor moves through space that no Imperial chart adequately records, and Tyberos the Red Wake, standing ahead above warriors who are already the tallest things in any room they enter, speaking in whispers that carry the promise of certain death, refuses the Emperor's newest gift. Not out of pride, not out of tradition, not because the Carcharodons believe themselves above the biology Cawl has spent 10,000 years perfecting. He refuses because the moment his blood enters the Rubicon apparatus, the moment the Belisarian furnace begins its integration and Cawl's system reads what it finds against the Primarch templates that underlie every organ being implanted, an anomaly flag generates against a degraded section of an archive that was supposed to have been erased. A signature that does not match any of the 18 clean loyalist templates. A signature that resembles, partially, brokenly, unmistakably, something in the portion of the Magna Mater that no one is supposed to examine. And the Null Primarch stops being a secret the outer dark can keep. The erasure holds for 10,000 years. The records are gone. The institutional memory is gone. The legions are gone. The only thing that remains is the body, leading the Red Brethren into void assault after void assault, never still long enough to be studied, never close enough to be examined, never in front of the one instrument in the galaxy sophisticated enough to read what is actually there. That instrument is waiting. Cawl built it. He knows what it can find. And the Shade Lord of the Carcharodons, who speaks in whispers and has never needed to raise his voice, has spent a very long time ensuring he is never in the room when the question is asked. Subscribe for more stories like this.